Hello, and welcome to the walkthrough. On today's episode, we're going to take a deep dive into the very controversial and popular, spreading like wildfire, Plandemic documentary on YouTube, social media. And I think the way we should do this is kind of talk about it briefly, make sure that we're all on the same page. What is it even about? And then discuss why is it so effective? Why is it getting so much traction? And then go step by step and maybe debunk some of the claims made in the film, so that way we can all have a broader perspective of what's really going on here. So for those of you who haven't seen it, Plandemic is a documentary about Dr. Judy Mikovits, who's a biologist and so-called expert on virology, specifically viruses and how they're related to chronic fatigue syndrome, Alzheimer's, autism, and the idea that perhaps this COVID-19 pandemic has been some sort of planned global conspiracy to infect the human race, all right? That's the basic benchmark, baseline. Now, in the film, they suggest that Dr. Fauci stated years back that, hey, in the future, there might be a virus, there might be a pandemic that kind of catches us off guard, and we need to be ready for it. By making this suggestion, the film infers that perhaps maybe Dr. Fauci, maybe the global elites are responsible for creating and spreading this virus. And that's a little absurd, right? That's like blaming the weatherman if he predicts that there's going to be a hurricane in the summertime, and then saying he's the reason the hurricane was created, and he spreaded it, and he sent it to Miami, Florida, or Cuba, and kind of destroyed everything. That's not how it works. His job is to predict what's going to happen. Dr. Fauci's job, as well as other epidemiologists and people who study these viruses, is to predict and hopefully prevent these sorts of situations from happening. The film also talks about Big Pharma, essentially the idea that the big pharmaceutical companies are suppressing or outright banning cheap or alternative medications for the COVID-19 virus as a way to make those big bucks. And we'll dive into why that's ludicrous, but that's kind of the undertones. Big Pharma is also a part of this, and they are incentivized to have all the treatments be suppressed so that everyone gets infected. Because the big clincher, what the whole documentary relies on, is this idea, quote, the game is to prevent the therapies until everyone is infected, then push the vaccines. That's not even how vaccines work, okay? The way a vaccine works is that you get a vaccine to prevent getting sick. If everybody is infected with a virus, guess what? We have a immunity towards the virus, those of us who survive, and there's no need for a vaccine. So it doesn't even make any sense. Just to make sure we're on the same page, vaccines don't cure diseases, they prevent diseases. This is why little kids get vaccines when they grow up, is because it prevents them from getting measles, mumps, rubella, polio. It doesn't cure measles, mumps, rubella, and polio. So right off the bat, there is a unstable and rocky scientific foundation behind this entire film. So some of you might be asking, okay, John, well, if there's this many errors in the documentary, if it's this crazy, bro, then why is it so popular? Why is it being taken down from YouTube? Is it possible that there's some truth to this? Is it possible that the reason it's being taken down is because the deep state, Dr. Fauci, the government, the Illuminati, don't want us to know the truth, man? Well, let's dive into it, right? Let's talk about why this is so popular and why YouTube is taking it down so frequently. So, why is it so popular? The film does a great job of using 5, I would say, key points to get its message across, and it's very, very effective. Some of these data points, you can see it in some of the articles linked below. This Forbes article is amazing at breaking down the why. But the first one is this film is very, very well edited. I'm talking about Netflix Tiger King level editing. It's amazing. It's addicting, fast cuts. I love it. It's awesome, okay? So when you're watching this, you're going to say to yourself, I've seen documentaries like this before. I've seen these fast cuts. I've seen the music. I've seen the lighting before. And those documentaries are good. And some of those documentaries are filled with information. Maybe this is one of those documentaries. So from a technical standpoint, these people need to get the Sundance Film Festival Award for documentaries because it was actually very well made. Then they rely on these 3 key logical argument points that is what a lot of us use to make decisions in our lives. We might not be aware of it, but there are 3 kind of fundamental principles that we use to decide on what to do or decide on what is a correct course of action, right? So the first one is this idea called ethos. So ethos is the idea where you appeal to authority or credibility. So ethos is why you go to a doctor, and when they give you a diagnosis, you believe them without knowing what that is, without having to go to medical school yourself. You go, this person's the doctor. They say I have something wrong with me. I'm going to take the medication. I'm going to go home. That's ethos, okay? And the way the film is set up, we're introduced to Judy Mikovits as an expert in biology, an expert in virology, a woman who knows the truth, capital T. And that makes us say, okay, let's listen to her. You know, getting a PhD is hard. She has the word doctor in her name. She must know what she's talking about. And that makes us give her some level of trust. The second one is something called pathos, which is appealing to your emotions, right? So oftentimes we make decisions based on our sense of justice. Maybe we'll make a decision based on how something makes us feel, trusting your gut, right? So early on, the film makes us view Dr. Mikovits as a victim, a persecuted scientist who was making groundbreaking research on how viruses and perhaps viruses as related to vaccines could be the cause of all these chronic conditions that we don't really have an answer for. Big ones are chronic fatigue syndrome, which is what her lab studied, maybe autism, maybe Alzheimer's, who knows, right? So right off the bat, we're saying, okay, I haven't heard of her. Is it because she's been persecuted? Is it because she's been silenced? I'm starting to have these feelings towards this woman, and now you're having this level of not only credibility because she's a PhD, a doctor, but also you feel bad for her. You feel this persecution kind of emotion, and you want to root for her because, you know, she's the underdog. We all want to root for the underdog. So that's very powerful. And the last one is logos. So logos is appealing to logic, reason, evidence. And here is where the film takes pieces of information that sound correct and then just kicks them to the moon in terms of Crazy Town. But again, since we already think she's an expert, since we already emotionally connect with her, everything that comes from that point forward, we're like, that sounds about right. Very similar to if a doctor tells you something's going on with your lungs and you're like, it's pneumonia. He went to medical school. Whatevs. We're here and we have that same type of approach. She's an expert. I don't really know if this is right or wrong. Sounds close enough. Let me go listen to it. And we'll talk about what some of those things might be. A big one is wearing masks activate the virus. That's incorrect. Staying indoors lowers your immune system. You don't want to be indoors anymore. Anything that makes you want to leave your house, you're going to listen to it because it makes you feel good. That's also wrong. We'll go into that later as to why that's wrong. But all this information is pseudoscience. It's not strong science. There is no evidence. Just because somebody with a PhD says it, or even someone with an MD says it, doesn't mean it's true. This is why we have peer-reviewed articles. This is why we use evidence. Podcast number 1, we talk about scientific method. We talked about due process. Using evidence as much as you can to make a decision is the way to go. But this documentary does a great job of using those 4 techniques. The last one, which is kind of an interesting one, I learned more about it this week. This idea of something called Gish-Gallop. So Gish-Gallop is a arguing technique or a debate technique where you hit people with so much information, they're unable to even process what you're saying, much less debate it, right? So in the documentary, and we'll go through most of it later, it talks about masks could be bad for you. Flu vaccines have coronavirus. Big Pharma is this big conspiracy theory that's trying to suppress all the drugs. There's a planned pandemic by Dr. Fauci, maybe Bill Gates, maybe Ronald McDonald. I don't know, okay? Too many information, too many quote unquote facts for your brain to process. And so you get confused. So you end up just saying, you know what? If one thing is true, it must all be true. I don't really care, right? And that's a very effective way to kind of overwhelm the mind. So as a package, this is an effective vehicle to push misinformation, to push propaganda. And that's kind of scary, right? Because you see this documentary, right? You see it keeps coming up on my Instagram feed just nonstop. It comes up in my YouTube feed nonstop. It keeps getting taken down, and you're wondering, well, why is this happening? Well, there's something that a lot of us rely on, and we might not be aware of it, and there's something called tribal knowledge. So tribal knowledge is this idea that it's impossible for any one person to know everything, okay? So we rely on our friends, our family, our tribe to help vet information, to help vet people, right? Imagine you're at a bar, you're at a party, you don't know everybody there, but because they're at the party, you say, hey, they must be cool people, because otherwise they wouldn't be here, because we're all friends here, right? It's the same concept, but now we're talking about conspiracy theories and propaganda. So if enough of your friends, enough of my friends post this, your mind might default and say, hey, there must be some truth to this, because why does it keep coming up on my feed? Why do my friends keep posting it, right? And so that's a very powerful tool, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast, is because the reverse of that is true. If we keep sharing correct information, if we keep speaking up against propaganda, if we keep speaking up against conspiracy theories that could hurt people, that we can use tribal knowledge to our advantage. But that's why it keeps showing up, is because we trust our friends, some of our friends trust the documentary, and bam, here we are, okay? So now we're going to go into a little bit of what I call the debunking session, and we're going to go deep dive, and we're going to go through some of the points in the documentary. It's kind of long, a lot of points to go through. We'll hit the highlights. That way you know what's going on. That way you're informed, and you could be that tribal knowledge, anti-propaganda machine for your friends and family. So first of all, who's Dr. Judy Mikovits? Well, she was originally the head of research for the Whitson-Peterson Institute, where she was studying chronic fatigue syndrome. This is a weird disorder, essentially, where people are very weak, have low energy. We don't really know what causes it. Some people think it's chronic Lyme. Some people think it's a psychosomatic disorder, aka it's more of like a mental condition, right? We don't know. But her lab allegedly figured out that there's a virus called XMRV that was found in patients who have chronic fatigue syndrome. The problem with that is that virus is literally everywhere. It's a contaminant, right? So it can contaminate your samples. That's one of the really tough things about research. It gets your samples can get contaminated way too easily. You have to be very methodical with your processes. And so her lab and other labs were unable to replicate her results. So even though it was published in the paper Science, I think in 2011, they eventually retracted the entire paper in 2015 because there was no way to reproduce her studies. So one of her biggest claim to fame was not reproducible. And that's a big deal. When you do science research, yourself and everybody else can repeat it again and again and again and get the same results. But unfortunately, nobody was able to do it. So they pulled it. Now, in the video, they talk about how she got arrested. She was persecuted in silence, dragged from her home. They show a SWAT team, a random SWAT team. I'm pretty sure I saw that scene in Cops in like 1995, but that's okay. And that never happened with her. She was never taken out of her home with a SWAT team. She actually was arrested for going back to that institute and stealing intellectual property, research materials, once she was already fired. And she just turned herself in. There were no SWAT teams. There wasn't a Call of Duty level, okay? Nobody came to her house and took her from her house. That never happened, right? And the video implies that with these stock footage scenes. Again, super well done documentary, okay? But that never happened. Now we're going to go into some of the deeper dives. So that's who she is. She got discredited, pulled, her papers got pulled, she got fired from that position, and then she found the home in the anti-vaxxer alternative quote-unquote facts community, which we now know is a conspiracy theory community, okay? And that's kind of where we're at in terms of her support base at this point. In the documentary, we talk about the Wuhan lab. We talk about that, right? That's a big hot topic where, hey, COVID-19 was in the Wuhan lab in China. They study coronaviruses there. Could they have created the COVID-19 virus and spread it to the world? No, probably not. Okay, yes, this virus is studied there. Yes, there is a lab in Wuhan, China. Yes, the U.S. funded this lab. And it was funded after the SARS epidemic in China. Okay? And the reason it was started is because it was precisely started so that we can study coronaviruses, because coronaviruses are native to that part of China. It's a hotspot. And by studying the place where they come from, by studying the place where there's a lot of coronaviruses, we can hopefully prevent epidemics and pandemics in the future. That does not mean that because you study something, you are the cause of it, right? That's not how science works. That's not how studies works. But the documentary infers that that could be a possibility. And again, any lab that studies cancer, the lab isn't giving people cancer. Any lab that studies radiation, the lab isn't giving people radiation, right? You see how if you follow it to its extreme, it doesn't make a lot of sense. The idea that big pharma is banning and suppressing cheap drugs like hydroxychloroquine. The documentary talks about how hydroxychloroquine has been, quote, extensively studied in many viruses. No, it has not. It's actually been studied in malaria, which is not a virus. And we have been using hydroxychloroquine to try to treat our patients. It's been having mixed results. And I think right now there's currently 169 studies trying to validate whether or not hydroxychloroquine is the way to go. But again, we're getting mixed results, and it was never specifically studied for coronavirus until this pandemic, right? So, and that's really important to know. The second drug that we're talking about is this drug called remdesivir. That's been shown to be really promising. And here's the kicker. You know how the documentary says big pharma is responsible for suppressing cheap drugs? Well, Gilead, the company that's the creator of this drug, is actually donating 1.5 million doses in the fight against COVID-19. So good job, big pharma. Way to kill it. All right. I like that. See, so we are seeing that even in real time, this documentary is not holding water. When it comes to staying inside weakens the immune system, this was caused by two emergency medicine doctors in California. One guy by the name of Dr. Daniel Erickson, the other Dr. Artin Mahini, something along those lines. Anywho, they basically were saying that staying indoors lowers your immune system. That's kind of where it came from. Here's the deal. The American Academy of Emergency Medicine, as well as the American College of Emergency Physicians, categorically denounced these guys, saying that they have reckless and untested musings, and they argue that these two men who own urgent care centers are pushing forth this idea that staying home lowers your immune system as a way to make financial gain from their urgent care centers. That's kind of messed up, right? So remember, this is a two-way street, right? If the government and the CDC and the WHO are part of a massive conspiracy to infect everybody, bro, then the flip side could also be true, right? These two guys who are saying, hey, it lowers your immune system. What are their incentives? Why are they saying this? Like, what do they have in the game, right? Something to think about. The idea that wearing a mask activates the virus. No. Moving on. No, I'm kidding. There is zero evidence that wearing any type of clothing activates a virus. That's like saying wearing basketball shorts activates pneumonia. Do you know how crazy that sounds? That is crazy. I don't want to use that term too much because you know what? I'm trying to have an active dialogue with people who might believe these ideas. But think about it, guys. Think about it. When has putting on a shirt given you a disease? That doesn't make any sense, you know? And some of these things do have that pragmatic, this makes no sense kind of approach. That's one of them. The idea that doctors are overdiagnosing COVID-19 for financial gains, wrong. That is incorrect. Look, people are getting infected with coronavirus. People are getting very, very sick. Up until recently, we have not had the testing capacity in the United States to test everybody. So if you had all the signs and symptoms of COVID-19, we diagnose you for that. Now, when we admit you to the hospital with oxygen requirements, ventilators, respiratory support. The cost of that, according to the documentary, the cost of that is about $13,000. Okay, so be like, wow, a COVID-19 case costs 13 grand. Here's the deal: respiratory cases that require that level of care cost $13,297. So COVID or not, when you are this sick and you need that much respiratory care, it's very expensive. Physicians are not overdiagnosing or purposely misdiagnosing patients with COVID to get those fat checks, man. Okay? In fact, a lot of physicians are being furloughed, they're being laid off, they're being fired, their hours are being cut because this is an economically tough time for all hospitals. Okay? It's not just Main Street, but as well as hospitals, they're suffering too, guys. This is the opposite side of the equation. So we just want to kind of get that clear. The idea that flu vaccines contain coronavirus, wrong. That there is no, that's just wrong. That's not, again, let's talk about how vaccines work. You get a virus that causes an illness, you weaken the virus or you kill it, you give it to the patient's body kills the virus, bam, they have immunity to the virus. That's how that works. You don't use another virus to cure another virus. That doesn't make any sense. Again, this is just poor science, all right? Poor science, pseudoscience, just straight up lies. And so this can lead people to not get the flu vaccine next year, which brings me to my next point. The idea that flu vaccine can increase your chance of getting coronavirus. Mixed. I wasn't going to say wrong. You thought I was going to say that, but I didn't. It's mixed. Here's where that study comes from. There are some studies that show, that was weird. I sound like a pirate. There are some studies that show that flu vaccines have been associated possibly with increase in upper respiratory infections. However, when you take that study to a longer time horizon, so you study it for longer, there is no conclusive evidence that flu vaccines makes you more susceptible to upper respiratory infections. It just doesn't, right? So that's a very dangerous thing because that is something we can prevent with the flu vaccine. Going back on the vaccine train, there are no vaccines for RNA viruses that work. That is super wrong. Here are a few: hepatitis A, measles, polio. Remember what I talked about? Measles, polio, the thing that we give kids, the vaccines that we give kids to prevent them from having those infections. RNA viruses, they prevent them from getting those diseases. One of the biggest breakthroughs in modern medicine. So again, a lot of factual errors in this documentary that are terrifying if people believe that they are true. So now we get to why are the social media giants taking this video off, right? The idea is, well, this woman is being persecuted. This woman and her crusade to spreading the truth and stopping big government, big pharma from giving the virus to everybody is being silenced. That's not true. According to the YouTube guidelines and social media guidelines, anything that puts people in imminent danger can be pulled. So if you're telling people to leave their house, not wear a mask, not get vaccinated, that is going to put them in direct harm. They're going to get sick. They don't know which side of the coin they're going to flip, right? They might be the patient who has COVID-19 and they look fine. They might be the patient who has to be intubated because they have a very, very strong systemic reaction, SIRS, systemic inflammatory related syndrome, okay? And they might die, all because they listened to this documentary, didn't put on a mask, didn't stay home, didn't seek proper medical attention. That is dangerous. And you know what? It's not beyond reason for someone to go, hey, I kept watching this documentary pop up on my YouTube feed and I watched it 10 times. And because I watched it 10 times, I didn't do shit when I got sick. And now I died or someone I know died. And now I'm going to sue YouTube for $100 million. You don't know. It's possible. It's very possible to sue them for that much money because they didn't do anything about it. That's the world we live in. This is probably why they're pulling it. And I know we say freedom of speech, and I get it. But as the famous kind of saying says, my right to throw a punch ends at your face. As long as what you're saying is not hurting people, go ahead, go nuts. But the advice that's being made, the claims that are being made, can directly make people sick. It can actually cause death. That is why it's being pulled. All right. And also, YouTube, these social media platforms, they're private companies. They can do whatever they want, but for the most part, they're pretty okay allowing freedom of speech. You know, they're pretty laissez-faire. But when it comes to this particular thing, I applaud them for taking the courage and banning misinformation, especially when it can lead to harm. And now I want to end with with a story that kind of throws back to another conspiracy theory back in the day. So this story is about a man, Leonard Posner, okay? He had a 6-year-old son, and his 6-year-old son was killed in the Sandy Hook shootings, the Sandy Hook massacre. There was a book called Nobody Died at Sandy Hook that claimed that it never happened, no kids died, and it was all a giant government conspiracy to take away our guns. It's part of a conspiracy, man. Well, Mr. Posner sued the authors of the book and won $450,000 because, again, you can say whatever you want. You can be as ignorant as you want. But that lies, those propagandas, was directly hurting a man and his family who was a direct victim of these shootings. And so for all the people that are out there fighting COVID-19, for all the family members that we've lost to this virus, for all the people putting themselves in the front line to stop this virus from spreading and to help everybody in need, documentaries like this are a travesty. They are the worst shit in the world. And if I can spread a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of light to kind of help everyone add to that tribal knowledge and make the tribe a little bit smarter, a little bit wiser, a little bit more prepared to handle these types of documentaries in the future, then you know what? I did my job. All right, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please check out the links in the show notes. We have all types of articles, all types of numbers, all types of facts. Please arm yourself with information. Be part of the solution. Enhance that tribal knowledge. Go out there, crush it. I'll see you next time. Bye.